Hi everyone, welcome to another table talk. So in this is sort of the wrap-up episode, I guess, of my series of table talks of the revision of my ParkJet workshop video that I shot. I think it's 3.5 years old now, maybe 4 years old. So anyway, today I just wanted to kind of wrap up some things, some ideas, things that I use in my workshop that you probably eventually will have to pick up, or might just inspire you for some ideas, things that either I forgot in the previous videos or didn't sort of really fit in anywhere. So anyway, so let's get right at it. One thing that I find very useful is some wax paper. Again, I just buy this at my favorite local hobby shop, the dollar store. It's very useful for when I'm gluing in reinforcements or anything like that. I like to be able to lay the pieces flat and put some weight down on them. So I always put a piece of wax paper underneath it and then a piece of wax paper on top of it, so that if for whatever reason any epoxy or anything like that oozes through, you're not going to glue your plane to your work table or glue the weight that you've put on top as well. So what I actually do is, I've got several big pieces here for that purpose, and I just keep reusing the same pieces. Eventually you get to the point where you might end up with some glue on it, either it's oozed through or you've handled it, so then you can throw that out and get yourself a fresh piece. But just if you've got some long, fairly long strips, I just keep them in a bag like this, and then I just reuse them for every build. So wax paper, really handy. The other thing I do is I always keep a smaller piece on my table, and I just cut it up in pieces, to mix up epoxy. I find it's really handy for stirring up epoxy, and then you can just throw the wax paper away. If you watch my video on how I install reinforcements in foam, I also use a bigger piece and sort of mix the epoxy up in the middle, hold it in my hand like a taco, and then put the the reinforcement through that. So wax paper is a very valuable thing for me, so really handy to have. Some other things, I've talked about this, even if you don't like using these for reinforcement, it's good to have some bamboo skewers around. They're really handy for stirring up paint, or even stirring up epoxy. You can cut them up in chunks, for stirring up epoxy, stuff like that. And they're dirt cheap. You get like 100 of them for $1. So bamboo skewers, good thing to have around. Again, this is like just a tongue depressor popsicle stick. These are handy as well. If you need to use these, you can use these to scrape off excess foam, or apply spackle, whatever else. I mean, all kinds of applications for these other than reinforcement. I talked about these in my reinforcement video as well. And again, pick these up at the dollar store for dirt cheap. These are always handy to have around. You never know when you just need a little chunk of wood for reinforcement or something like that. So tongue depressor and popsicle stick, handy things to have. One thing I forgot to mention in my tools video was having a pair of tweezers around is handy. Sometimes when you're installing your electronics and you put the servo in and the wires all bundle up, and you need some way to kind of reach in there and pull the servo lead out so you can get it connected, just having a simple pair of long tweezers really helps. So again, I think I picked these up at the dollar store. Actually, I think I picked up, there was a pack of about 4 of them with sort of different widths, tips on the end of them. So a pair of tweezers, really handy to have. I have several different little things that I store stuff in. Most of my tools I just use just old soup cans or vegetable cans. Just make sure that if the top end is sharp, that you sand that off or file it off a little bit so you don't cut your hand. But dirt cheap, and it recycles those. I've also saved lots of just old medicine bottles for some of the smaller pieces that I want to get to. Like this one has motor mounts with all the screws and everything in it, so keeps things. I know it doesn't look like it, but it helps for me. It helps keep things a little organized. I've already also found something like this at the dollar store. Really handy. I've got several little things there that I use on a fairly regular basis. So those are handy too. So lots of ideas for you know, different ways to store the little bits and pieces that you're always going to be grabbing when you're building a park jet, or maybe you know, you need to replace something. So some things that I would never throw. I don't throw away. I tend to hoard them a little bit, but you know, just because it's come handy is don't you know, most servos come with a whole bundle of servo arms. So I don't tend to throw away my servo arms because I mean, up to a certain point, if I end up with like 100 of them, I might throw a few of them out. But sometimes you just never know. These will work as good. You can use these as spacers, like cut all the little arms off of them, and you can use them as spacers if you need, you know, like a thicker washer or something like that. And also, you know, if you happen to break a servo arm, or you know, you've drilled a hole in it and it's not where you want it to be, you know, sometimes once you start drilling any holes in these servo arms, you run out of space, and then the servo arm can get a little weak. So hang on to those. I've always got probably way more around than I need to have. So that's one thing I don't throw away. The other things I also recycle are these little prop rings. You know, so these are the little spacer rings that you put inside of a prop, you know, in here to make sure that it fits on the shaft properly. I don't throw these away. I keep these, especially since I started using quad racing motors. I like to put one on the shaft before I put the prop on. It just sort of gives me some space between the prop and the motor. And also these can also be used as you know, inexpensive spacers and washers, and they're super light compared to, say, a metal washer. So hang on to your little prop spacers. The other thing is, you never know when you need one. You know, you get a prop, whatever's come out of the package, and the spacers don't necessarily work properly for you. If you watch, I'll link, RC Plane Pirate shot a video on balancing props, the TGS KMP props as well. Sometimes you can recycle these into a different prop to get a snug fit. So always hang on to those and have some spares. You never know when you're going to need them. You're going to probably need, you're definitely going to need some bullet connectors, 3.5mm bullet connectors. Most motors come with the sort of male piece on them. You know, if you buy like the Turnigy Aero Drive 28, 26, 6, 2200, but if you buy, like, if you want to experiment with quad racing motors, or the no-name 2212, 2200 motors, or 2700 kV motors, most of those don't come with connectors. So you can buy them in bunches, 10 pairs or whatever. What you'll probably definitely will need is for sure is the female end, because most speed controllers that you buy, they don't come with those connectors attached. So you're going to need those, and then be able to learn how to solder those on. So some brass bullet connectors. Again, 3.5mm is the only size that I use, primarily just because any motors that you buy that have them, any park jet motors that you buy that have them already, they have 3.5mm bullet connectors. So you can pick up a pack of 10 of them for 10 pairs of them for pretty cheap. So good to have those. The other things you're going to definitely need is these ones. These, for some reason, I bought these. They already have the wire soldered on them. But you're going to need an XT60 connector. Most of the batteries, or a Dean's connections, depending on which way you like to go. There's lots of different connectors, but most of the batteries, or a lot of the LiPo batteries that you buy have the XT60 connector on them already. So you're going to end up needing the other end to put on your speed controller. Now, I was always, I don't know, brain, a senior moment, I guess. I used to get a little bit confused when I'd look at these pictures, because they call them male and female, and I always thought that this was the male because it goes inside like that. But the opposite is true. This is actually the male here, because the actual prongs, the brass prongs, are on the inside of this. So the batteries essentially come with a female connector on them. So if you're looking to buy the connectors to go on your speed controller, you want to make sure you buy the male connectors so that they can connect to your battery. But again, those are just XT60, which right now seem to be the most popular size for most for most batteries that you're going to buy to use in park jets. So you're definitely going to need some of these to put on your speed controller. There is a speed controller if you're just getting started. There is a speed controller on the RC Power's website, I think, that already has the XT60 connector soldered on it, so that makes life pretty easy. But eventually, you're just definitely going to need them. You will need some. I've got just a party pack of heat shrink here, but you're eventually going to need to buy yourself some heat shrink. I think probably the size that I use the most. I've got several different sizes in here. Probably the size that I use the most is probably 5mm. Oop. Big 35 had a bit of a life of its own there. Sunday it's going to sleep maybe. Anyway, about 5mm. You can buy a meter of this stuff for dirt cheap. It's definitely the way to go. You know, on the end of, you know, when you're putting your soldering joints on your XT60 connectors and your you know, your bullet connectors on your speed controller, it's just so much easier to use heat shrink than just trying to wrap it with electrical tape or something like that. So yeah, definitely you'll want to invest in some heat shrink. I should have said at the start, I'm going to have a supporting blog post, so I'll have links to lots of this stuff that I use. Something else that you probably will want to get, these are little rare earth magnets. They're super strong. I bought like 400 of them off of eBay when I first got in the hobby, and I will probably still have I'll probably will rest my rare earth magnets. But these are really handy for you know, for your hatch cover when you're closing, you know, your battery hatch cover. These are really handy to hold that down. You can also use little bits of Velcro if you want, but I find that these little magnets, rare earth magnets, work really well. Okay, Velcro. I didn't really talk about Velcro. I use a couple of different types of Velcro. Some of the stuff I get from, you know, the industrial strength stuff. This is like the hook part. This is a really industrial strength kind of Velcro. I just buy it at the hardware store. It comes in big rolls. I put the hook stuff, the industrial strength stuff, I put this on my batteries because the hook stuff doesn't tend to collect up as many you know, bits of corruption and, you know, little bits of twigs and whatever else that might get caught up in the, you know, the sort of the furry stuff. And what I put in my planes is I actually put the furry stuff in my planes, and I buy this stuff from the dollar store. It's not quite as the furry part of it is not quite as thick as it is on the industrial stuff. What I used to do for a long time was I used the industrial stuff on both my battery and my plane, and what I was finding was the Velcro was so strong that quite often when I was pulling my battery in and out, I'd be stressing the foam a lot. I end up cracking the foam or ripping the Velcro off or whatever. So I just use the cheap dollar store stuff in the plane, and then the industrial stuff on the battery. On the speed controllers, speed controllers and receivers, I also use little squares of the industrial hook stuff to connect them in my plane. One little tip that I've found, the best stuff that works, the adhesive on this is not the best, and the only glue that I've found that helps hold this stuff down in my plane is actually 5-minute epoxy. So what I do is when I go to put it in my plane, I'll mix up some epoxy, give the foam actually just a tiny little bit of a scuff, maybe with the tip of your knife, you know, just to get some grooves in there, and then I put a thin layer of epoxy down on the foam, and then obviously peel the you know, this has a backing on it, so peel the backing off, and then I stick it down on top of the epoxy. And sometimes, like especially if you've got, you know, where it's been folded up, if you've got this little bend here, is, you know, take your wax paper, lay it down on top, and then lay something down, because if you put the thing in with the epoxy and then you go away, often what will happen is this will fold up on you, and then it you know, then it becomes a bit of a hassle. So yeah, 5-minute epoxy. I've tried hot glue. I've tried the this Bob Smith Industries foam cure type glue. Epoxy for me has always just worked the best. So again, mix up a little bit of epoxy, just a very thin layer between the furry stuff and the foam, and it should hold on for lots and lots of time. And that stuff, the combination of the inexpensive stuff from the dollar store in the plane and the industrial stuff on the battery, just seems to be the great combination for me. It works. I fly pretty aggressively, and it holds my batteries in there nice and strong. And for a long time, I've had planes, well over 300 flights, have worked just fine. Held the battery in there nice and tight. Okay, so toothpicks. Obviously, you hear me talk about toothpicks. I have a big box of toothpicks. Again, I just pick up a whole whack of these at the dollar store. I can pick up like a couple of 1,000 of them or something, I think, for dirt cheap. These are great for, again, I stir up, usually when I'm mixing up epoxy, I just use a toothpick, and then, you can apply it with a toothpick as well. Just lots of handy uses, so I always have a good supply of toothpicks. This little box is a bit of almost like the junk drawer that a lot of us have in our kitchens. We've got different size pins. These are kind of really thin ones with the little ball on the top of them. I use these a lot if I need to pin pieces together to hold them while the glue's drying. I also have a little bit more. These are a bit beefier. They're like a T-square pin. These are also handy if you need a little bit more strength, and I also use these when I'm marking the CG on my plane. Poke those in there. I've got a couple of bind plugs in here. These, they're handy to have on your workbench when you're building a plane, because as you get to the point where you're doing your electronics, just pull out a bind plug. Make sure your receiver is bound to your transmitter, so handy to have those. And I also have a couple little Allen wrenches or Allen keys, hex wrenches, whatever you like to call them. Super small ones here in case I've got a grub screw or something I need to tighten on a motor, something like that. So handy to have that. I have these are actually pre-made. These are like an ESC extension. So an extension, you plug the one end into your motor, or plug your motor into one end, plug your ESC into the other. I've read lots of arguments back and forth about making, if you need to make extensions, make the extensions on the other side of your between your motor and your speed controller, not between your speed controller and your battery. I just find that these have worked out well for me. These are pre-made. They're 3 inches long, I think, something like that. I get these from Hobby King, but you could also make them, if you had some spare wire around, you could also make them yourselves, just solder them up, a little bit of heat shrink. But these are definitely handy to have, because there are times where, I want to be able to have my speed controller nicely forward to get the proper balance without jamming my battery too far forward. So if I can get my battery 3 inches further forward, or my speed controller, about 3 inches further forward, it allows me to keep my battery a little tighter to the center of gravity. So anyway, these have become these are really helpful for me in certain planes. So yeah, some extensions there between the speed controller and the motor. Having some servo extensions, obviously very helpful. These are, you don't need a whole ton of these depending on what kind of planes you're building. Most park jets that I build, I very rarely, except maybe if the 5-gram servos, sometimes they have a pretty short wire on them, if you've watched my servo video. So it helps to have some of these. I think the longest length that I've used in most of my park jets are about 6 inches long, and you can get these. They buy these, I think, from Hobby King, maybe like in a pack of 5, whatever. But anyway, I'll have links for the ones that I use. Also, some Y harnesses. I tend to, when I build my planes, I tend to connect my rudders. I run 2 servos to my rudders, because most of the planes that I build have twin tails. Obviously, if you're building like an F-16 or something, you wouldn't need to worry about it. But I run 6-channel receivers, so by the time I've used up the other 5 with elevons, ailerons, and my speed controller, for my rudder I just use a Y harness. So plug both my rudder servos into one end, plug this end into my receiver. So again, I buy these, but you could probably make yours if you had, you know, some spare bits and pieces laying around, or, you know, some servo extensions. You could snip them off and, you know, just solder up your own, depending on how you want to do that. So those are good to have. Zip ties, you know, zip ties probably like electrical tape or duct tape. I don't think any workshop is properly equipped without them. So yeah, I just buy, this is like a, you know, a party pack from the dollar store. All kinds of you know, really small, tiny ones. So, you know, I like to kind of keep my wire bundles a bit neat and organized inside my plane, and also to keep them from you know, getting out into the open somewhere and getting caught in my prop or something. So yeah, just some inexpensive zip ties, handy to have. I've got several different lengths here, but primarily only use the smaller ones. But yeah, zip ties are a definite must in my workshop anyway. Let me see here. Okay, I think I mentioned this in my servo and linkage video. You know, having a little bit of this is just blue Loctite. You know, some people Loctite their motor screws in when they mount the X mount. I don't necessarily, because the motor, you know, in most pusher park jets, the motor is actually pushing into it, so it's very rare that you're going to have a situation where those screws are going to back off. But for my servo quick connects, I like to have a little bit of this blue Loctite so that I can make sure that the little nut on the bottom doesn't come off. So Loctite's a handy thing to have. Okay, I mentioned this I think in a previous video, but again, I'll just mention it again. Really handy to have, you know, as you're building park jets, is just a little inexpensive kitchen scale. And again, I only use this here because it's got glue and other things on it. So yeah, just pick yourself up one that's probably dedicated, if you want to keep the rest of your family happy, dedicated just to your workshop, so that if it gets glue or other gunk on it, you're not worried about it. But it's really handy to, you know, if you need to check, measure, weigh your components, things like that. You know, because lots of times if you're in doubt, you know, you'll see sometimes with certain vendors, they'll send you stuff and it's actual shipping weight is what the weight will say in the description, and you can weigh it and just double check it. And then it's also a good way to know how much your plane weighs, how much all your components weigh. This is primarily a lesson learned from when I was building my planes. Far too heavy, but I make a lot of use out of it. So just an inexpensive kitchen scale. This is just an old cardboard box. I keep lots of scrap foam, you know, so after every build I just cut up a bunch of chunks of scrap foam. This is, you know, super handy that if I'm building and I need to smear away some excess glue, whatever, applying things to your plane, just recycles, makes use out of that scrap foam. That's, you know, if you've got pieces that, you know, you can't, say, build another or a spare piece out of for a plane. So I have always have lots of scrap foam around for use to help with my plane build. These are actually just a couple of, you know, obviously they're pieces of 2x4. What I find these are handy for is, you know, quite often during a build, like let's say, you know, I've done a bunch of gluing here on the bottom of my plane, and I don't necessarily want it to sit upside down, especially if, you know, the tails are on already. What I can do is I can just use these 2x4s, and, you know, just build, you know, it's a completely adjustable, I guess, if you want, building rack. The other nice thing is too is that, you know, lots of planes that you build, you know, one of the last things you can put on is actually the vertical stabilizers. So after you've built the entire plane except for the vertical stabilizers, these are really, really handy to hold your plane, you know, relatively level while you install all your servos and get your control surfaces centered and all that sort of stuff. So these are just really handy that way. Again, just a couple of chunks of 2x4, but they're just obviously super adjustable to whatever you need to do, and don't cost much. Obviously, if you've got a couple of scraps of 2x4 laying around your house. I won't show them to you. I actually find I've on my phone, if you have a smartphone, there's a couple of apps. You know, if you just search, there's lots of apps. I have a couple of apps that I use quite a bit. One is like weight conversion, you know, because I'm not swift enough to always convert ounces to grams, or, you know, or whatever. And so I find that that's really handy. Another thing that I have is length conversion. So if I need to convert inches to millimeters or to centimeters or whatever, just a couple of quick apps on my phone I find work really make my life a lot easier, and they were just free. I have an Android phone, so pardon me, I just got them from the Google Play Store. Those are handy. So, okay, so I'm just going to talk. I didn't really talk a whole lot about my workshop. I'm just actually in a spare bedroom in my house, and it's it's kind of my man cave, I guess, if you want, for for doing all this mad science and all this building. So I just got, this is just a, if you're, say you got some spare room in your house that your family's allowed you to have to set up your shop. This is just a super solid. It's a foldable table that I got from a hardware store. I think it cost me like $50. Keep your eye out. You can get them on sale. It's I think it's a good 6 feet long anyway. Has worked really well. Obviously, it's it's very dirty, covered in bits of glue and paint and all that sort of stuff. I did mention this in one of my other videos. Probably this is a I know some people just use scrap cardboard, and that'll work well. You definitely want to have something underneath when you're cutting your foam or doing any cutting. And these cutting mats, like I've had this cutting mat probably, as you can tell, but it's got some serious wear here. But I've had this cutting mat probably for going on 5 years. And you can, I'm left-handed, so you can tell down in this corner I do a lot of cutting. But I've also rotated it around. It's kind of handy too because it has a grid on it, centimeters and inches. So if you need to measure something real quick, a push rod or something, you can just kind of, rather than digging out a ruler, you can just kind of lay it on this thing. The other thing with it too is that, I paid, I think about $25 for this thing, and then you can always flip it on the other side. It doesn't have a grid on this side, but definitely, and what I would say is, buy one, that is, kind of matches your work area. Like when I first started building, I just went out and bought a little tiny one, like a 12 by 12 or something. So definitely get yourself one that works well on your work area, because there's going to be lots of times when you're going to be making big long cuts when you're building a park jet. So rather than cutting for a little while and then moving the piece and then cutting for a little while, and then it just makes life a lot easier if you have a good size cutting mat. I've got a couple of lamps here. These are just kind of gooseneck lamps, adjustable. I've got another one here that you don't normally see because it's, but it's it's really handy if I need to get, depending on the light condition in the room, if I need to get some light right down on something to do some delicate work, and I just have those bolted right to the table. Those work out really well. And behind me here, I've got my my computer and my printer and all that other sort of stuff. So I'm really lucky. I'm kind of self-contained. I've got lots of storage bins here for assorted stuff. Spare servos, motors, all that sort of stuff. Paints, all that sort of thing. So for most of us, I know, for me anyway, the way I like to kind of keep my park jet workshop stocked. Well, I mean, now I've been doing this for several years, so I very rarely have to buy things like servos and stuff like that. I mean, they do eventually wear out, but I like to, because I have to buy, for my components anyways, 99% of the stuff I have to buy online, and in order to save money, lots of times I'm buying from vendors in China where the shipping takes forever and a day. So if I could give you a little bit of advice, if you think, especially when build season's coming up, wherever you live, like a lot of us tend to do more building in the winter when the weather's not good, is get yourself a little bit stocked up. I always probably have enough servos, minimum enough servos, props, motors, speed controllers, for like at least 2 planes, so that if I get on a real creative burst and I decide to build a couple of planes, then I'm not sitting around building the plane and then waiting for the components. So that's kind of a tip I could have. And often some of the vendors, if you buy, they don't seem to as much anymore, but they used to be that if you bought certain things in bulk, you got a bit of a discount. But anyway, that's kind of how I keep my things resupplied. Like I said, I don't I don't buy a whole lot of things, servos and stuff anymore, because I just have so many, and I just recycle them into the next plane. Yeah, so there we go, folks. That's that's kind of the wrap up here of this series of videos. Hopefully it's been helpful to you. A little bit of a tour of my extremely well organized workshop, sort of in front of me where you can't see. In between the wall and my table is where I store all my foam, my sheets of foam. Just to kind of keep those out of the way and keep them from falling over and all that sort of stuff. And I keep bits and pieces, as you can see over here. I keep lots of bits and pieces of scrap that might be, if I can use a scrap piece of something for a vertical stabilizer or a Elevon, something like that. It's always handy to keep some of the bigger sizes of scrap foam, because in the long run you can recycle bits and pieces and then save yourself sheets of foam. So those are handy ideas there as well. So so thank you for sticking with me through this this remake of my ParkJet workshop video. I will probably keep that old video active on my website. It's or on my YouTube channel, I should say. It's quite long, and I think that I've covered, pretty sure that I've covered everything in there, and I've updated everything that things that I don't use anymore that I talked about in that video, or maybe techniques that I use now that I didn't use before. I'll keep that there, but hopefully by having that video now broken up into several things, it'll make it a lot easier. That if you just you want to learn about motors, speed controllers, batteries, you can go to the particular video. So anyway, thanks very much for watching. Blue skies, calm winds to everyone. ParkJet noise, the other sound of freedom. And as I said before, there will be a blog post down below with links and all that sort of stuff to a lot of the stuff that I talked about here today, that the little goodies that I like to have on hand. So yeah, so thanks very much, folks. Your support to my channel, to my blog, very, very much appreciated from the bottom of my heart. Graciously, thank you. So best of luck in your ParkJet journeys, and take care.